When I found the group chat titled, Sarah's Welcome Back Party on my boyfriend's phone, I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't even confront him. Instead, I did something that would haunt him for years. You see, Sarah wasn't just his ex. She was the reason he almost didn't choose me 3 years ago. And tonight, while he lied about working late, he was planning her perfect homecoming. But here's the thing about playing games with someone who's done playing. I was about to teach him that some moves you can't take back. It started like any other Tuesday morning. Jake was in the shower, humming that off-key tune he thought was charming, while I made coffee in our kitchen. The one we'd painted sage green last month because he said it would help us build something beautiful together. His phone sat on the marble countertop, buzzing insistently against the cold surface like an angry bee trapped against a window. The first notification was innocent enough. "Don't forget the streamers," from someone named Marcus. But then came another. And another. Each buzz felt like a tiny earthquake in my perfectly organized morning routine. I'm not usually the type to look at someone else's phone. Call it respect, call it trust, or maybe just call it the kind of willful blindness that keeps relationships comfortable. But when the fifth message arrived from someone called Party Planning Committee, and the preview showed, Sarah will love the surprise playlist, my coffee mug froze halfway to my lips. The name that had haunted the first 6 months of our relationship like a ghost neither of us wanted to acknowledge. Sarah, who went to graduate school in London and left Jake, devastated but proud of her ambition. Sarah, who called at midnight our first Valentine's Day together because she was having a crisis and needed someone who really knew her. Sarah, whose picture Jake had hastily shoved into a drawer when I started staying over regularly, thinking I hadn't noticed the gilt frame catching lamplight from under a stack of unopened mail. My finger hovered over his phone screen. In my marketing career, I'd learned that information is power, but the wrong information at the wrong time can destroy everything you've built. The shower was still running. I had maybe 3 minutes before Jake emerged, hair dripping, asking if I'd seen his phone because work might call early today. The lie was sitting right there in a group chat with 17 participants, discussing balloon colors and whether Sarah still preferred red wine or if her taste had matured during her time abroad. I tapped the screen. The chat exploded in front of me like a carefully orchestrated symphony of deception. Messages dated back 2 weeks. 2 weeks of "can't wait to see her face," and "it's been too long," and Jake's own contributions. "I'll handle the music, I know exactly what she likes." There were discussions about guest lists where my name was notably absent, debates about whether to use their old college hangout or somewhere more intimate, and a particularly nauseating thread about recreating that perfect night from sophomore year, when apparently the whole group had driven to the beach and watched sunrise after some party. But it was Marcus's message from yesterday that made my blood turn to ice water. "Dude, are you sure Emma won't mind? This is pretty elaborate for an ex." And Jake's response, time-stamped at 11:47 p.m. while I was sleeping beside him. "Emma doesn't need to know. She wouldn't understand the history we all have. She's not really the sentimental type anyway." Not the sentimental type. I stared at that phrase until the letters blurred together. This from the man who'd cried when I surprised him with a scrapbook of our first year together. Who'd insisted we keep the ticket stubs from our first movie date. Who'd made me promise to wake him up if I ever had nightmares because partners don't face darkness alone. The shower shut off. I had seconds to decide who I was going to be in this moment. The old Emma would have confronted him immediately. Phone thrust forward like evidence in a courtroom, voice rising with each discovered message. The old Emma would have demanded explanations, reassurances, promises that this meant nothing. The old Emma would have made this about winning Jake back from Sarah's memory. But as I set his phone back down exactly where I'd found it, I realized something that surprised even me. I wasn't angry. I was disappointed, which somehow felt infinitely worse. This wasn't a moment of weakness or poor judgment. This was a window into who Jake really was when he thought no one was watching. Someone who could compartmentalize his life so completely that he could plan an elaborate surprise for his ex-girlfriend while lying next to me at night. Someone who could discuss my emotional limitations with college friends who'd never bothered to get to know me. "Morning, beautiful," Jake said, appearing in the kitchen with damp hair and that easy smile that used to make my stomach flutter. You're up early. Everything okay? I handed him his coffee, black with 1 sugar, exactly how he'd trained me to make it 3 years ago. Everything's perfect, I said, and for the first time in our relationship I was lying too. But unlike Jake, I was lying with purpose. Great, he said, kissing my cheek with lips that tasted like mint toothpaste and betrayal. I might be a little late tonight. Big project deadline. Of course, I replied, watching him scroll through his phone, probably checking those party planning messages while standing 3 feet away from me. Work comes first. He looked up, slightly surprised by my understanding tone. Usually I'd pout a little when he worked late, make jokes about being a work widow. Today I just smiled and started planning the most important project of my life. The strategic dissolution of everything we'd built together. Because if Jake thought he could play games with someone who'd spent 3 years learning his patterns, his weaknesses, his tells, well, he was about to discover that some women don't fight for men who don't fight for them. They just quietly, efficiently, make sure the man realizes exactly what he's lost. The beautiful thing about being a marketing analyst is that research is literally my superpower. While Jake showered and got ready for another day of work, complete with suspicious enthusiasm for staying late, I was already 3 moves ahead, my laptop open on our dining table like a war room command center. Sarah Martinez, 27 years old. Recently completed her master's in international relations at King's College London. Posted exactly 43 photos in the past month with captions like, "London, you've been magic, but it's time to come home," and "Can't wait to reconnect with people who really know me." The kinds of posts that seem innocent until you realize they're strategic breadcrumbs leading straight back to your boyfriend's emotional doorstep. I scrolled through her Instagram with the same methodical precision I used to analyze consumer behavior patterns for my clients. Sarah was good, I had to give her credit. Every post was carefully curated to seem casual while broadcasting her availability. The photo from last week showed her packing boxes with the caption, "Some chapters end so better ones can begin." The one from 3 days ago featured her at Heathrow Airport, wheels up to new adventures, or maybe old ones worth revisiting, winking faced. But it was her LinkedIn activity that really told the story. Sarah had been strategically reaching out to their entire college friend group over the past month, commenting on posts, sharing memories, rebuilding connections she'd let fade during her time abroad. She'd even liked one of Jake's professional posts from 2 weeks ago, something about a successful campaign launch, with a comment that made my stomach turn. "Still changing the world just like you always said you would. So proud." Red heart. I screenshotted everything. Not because I planned to use it against anyone, but because I needed to understand the scope of what I was dealing with. This wasn't some spontaneous reunion. This was a carefully orchestrated homecoming, and Jake had apparently volunteered to be the welcoming committee. My phone buzzed with a text from Maya, my best friend and the closest thing I had to a sister. "Coffee before work? You sounded weird yesterday." Instead of our usual coffee shop, I suggested we meet at the park near my office. I needed air that didn't smell like the cologne Jake wore. The same cologne he'd probably sprayed extra today for his late night at work. "Okay, spill," Maya said the moment she saw me. "You have that look." "What look?" "The same look you had right before you quit that toxic job last year. Like you've figured something out and you're already 10 steps ahead of everyone else." I told her everything. The group chat, Sarah's strategic social media campaign, Jake's elaborate deception, the timeline that proved this had been planned for weeks. Maya's face cycled through disbelief, rage, and finally, something that looked almost like pride. "So what's the plan?" she asked. "Bez, I know you have one. You always have a plan." "I'm going to disappear," I said simply. Not dramatically. Not with a big confrontation or ultimatums. "I'm just going to evaporate from his life." Maya nearly choked on her lot. "That's it? After 3 years?" "Think about it," I said, pulling out my phone to show her Jake's banking app. We'd shared passwords last year when we started talking about moving in together. "Look at these transactions. Catering supplies from that gourmet place downtown. Flowers from the shop where he bought my birthday bouquet. A playlist subscription he's never used before. He spent over $800 on this party, Maya. $800 he didn't spend on my birthday last month because he said we should be more practical about money. The math was devastating. For my birthday, I'd gotten dinner at chain restaurant and a card that said, "Sorry, work's been crazy," in his handwriting. But for Sarah's welcome home party, he'd bought premium catering and artisanal flowers. The location is even worse, I continued, showing her the address from the group chat. Remember that rooftop bar I wanted to try for our anniversary? The one he said was too expensive for what you get? Guess where Sarah's party is being held? Maya stared at me. You're frighteningly calm about this. Because I'm not competing anymore, I said, and realized it was true. The old me would have fought for him. Would have shown up looking amazing and tried to prove I was better than Sarah. But you know what I figured out this morning? I don't want to be with someone I have to compete for. I want to be with someone who chooses me every single day without question. So you're really just leaving? I'm strategically repositioning myself, I corrected, using corporate speak that made us both laugh despite everything. Jake thinks he's managing two separate worlds, his past with Sarah and his present with me. He's about to learn that some worlds collide whether you want them to or not. I pulled up the real estate app on my phone. Remember how my company offered me that remote position based in Seattle? The one I turned down because Jake said long distance never works. Maya's eyes widened. Emma, you're not seriously. I called them yesterday afternoon. The position's still available. Better salary, better title, and 3,000 miles away from whatever this mess is about to become. What about your lease here? I showed her the text thread with our landlord. Turns out Jake never actually signed the lease renewal. It's month to month in my name only. I can be out by the end of next week. Maya was quiet for a long moment. You've thought of everything. I learned from the best, I said, thinking about all the campaigns I'd planned, all the market research that taught me to anticipate every possible outcome. Jake's about to realize that the woman he took for granted is the same woman who just outmaneuvered him completely. Are you going to tell him? About Seattle, about knowing about the party? I smiled, and it felt different than any smile I'd worn in months. Lighter. More honest. Maya, I'm going to do something much better than telling him. I'm going to show him exactly what he chose. Because tonight, while Jake was busy recreating magical college memories with his ex-girlfriend, I was going to be creating the first day of my new life. And unlike his carefully planned party, my exit strategy didn't require lying to anyone. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do isn't fighting for someone's attention. Sometimes it's making them realize they never deserved it in the first place. 3 years ago I was a different person entirely. I can see her so clearly now, that girl who would have handled this morning's discovery with tears, accusations, and desperate attempts to prove she was worth choosing. She feels like a character from a book I read long ago. Familiar but foreign, someone I recognize but no longer relate to. That Emma would have confronted Jake the moment he stepped out of the shower, voice shaking with hurt and disbelief. She would have demanded to know why Sarah mattered more than their anniversary dinner, why an ex-girlfriend's homecoming warranted the kind of elaborate planning that our relationship milestones never received. She would have made it about competition, about proving herself worthy of the love she thought she deserved. I remember exactly when that version of me died. It was 8 months ago, during what Jake called our communication breakthrough, but what I now realize was my graduation from doormat to equal partner. We'd been fighting about something trivial, whether to spend Christmas with his family or mine, and he'd said something that stopped me cold. Emma, you always make everything so complicated. Why can't you just be easy to love like? He'd caught himself before saying her name, but we both knew who he meant. That night, alone in our bed while Jake slept peacefully beside me, I'd stared at the ceiling and asked myself a question that changed everything. Why was I working so hard to be easy to love for someone who made loving me feel like a burden? The next morning I'd started therapy. Not couples therapy, individual therapy, because I realized the problem wasn't our communication. The problem was that I'd spent 3 years trying to be the girlfriend Jake wanted instead of being the woman I was becoming. Dr. Chen had asked me during our 3rd session, Emma, what would you do if you knew you couldn't fail? I'd laughed and said something about getting promoted or traveling more. But now, sitting at my kitchen table with evidence of Jake's betrayal glowing on my laptop screen, I knew the real answer. I would stop settling for someone who saw my love as optional. The woman I'd become over these past months wouldn't beg Jake to choose her over Sarah. She wouldn't make passionate speeches about their 3-year history or threaten to leave unless he canceled the party. She wouldn't show up tonight looking devastatingly beautiful, hoping to remind him what he had. She would simply remove herself from an equation where she was never the priority. My phone rang. Jake probably calling between meetings to maintain the fiction of his busy workday. "Hey baby." His voice was warm, familiar, completely normal. "Just wanted to check in. You seemed quiet this morning." Did I? I kept my tone light, conversational. "I was probably just thinking about work." "Right, the Morrison account presentation is this week. You nervous?" The Morrison account. Jake had never remembered client names before, but suddenly he was tracking my professional life with careful attention. I realized this was guilt behavior, the extra consideration that came from someone trying to balance their deception. He was being attentive to assuage his conscience while planning another woman's perfect evening. "I'm confident," I said and meant it. "Actually, I'm feeling really good about everything lately. Clear, you know." There was a pause. "That's great. Really great. You deserve to feel confident. You deserve." Past tense. Like he was already saying goodbye. "What time should I expect you home?" I asked, giving him rope to hang himself with. "Probably late. This deadline is brutal, and you know how Peterson gets when projects run over schedule." The lie rolled off his tongue so smoothly I almost admired the craftsmanship. "Don't wait up. I'll grab dinner at the office." "Of course," I said. "Work comes first." After we hung up, I sat in the silence of our apartment, the space we decorated together, filled with compromises that suddenly looked like concessions. The throw pillows I'd wanted but he'd called too feminine. The coffee table books about travel destinations he'd deemed impractical to visit. The framed photo from last Christmas where his smile looked strained because I'd insisted we visit my parents instead of his. How many times had I been too much, or too complicated, or too emotional for pointing out things that were actually important? How many of my needs had been reframed as unreasonable requests? I pulled out my laptop and opened a new document. Not for work, for clarity. I started listing everything I'd compromised on in our relationship. Every time I'd made myself smaller to fit into Jake's life more comfortably. The list was longer than I'd expected and more devastating than any group chat could ever be. But beneath the disappointment was something unexpected. Relief. Relief that I'd finally seen clearly. Relief that I didn't have to keep pretending this was enough. Relief that the woman I'd worked so hard to become was strong enough to walk away from someone who saw her growth as inconvenience rather than gift. I looked around our living room one more time, seeing it with new eyes. The furniture we'd chosen together suddenly looked like props in someone else's life. The photos on the mantel felt like evidence of a relationship I'd been performing rather than living. 3 years ago, discovering Jake's party for Sarah would have shattered me. Today it was simply the final piece of information I needed to make the decision I should have made months ago. The old Emma would have fought for this relationship. The new Emma was about to show Jake exactly what he was losing by not fighting for it himself. And unlike his elaborate party planning, my exit strategy was going to be flawless. Maya was right about one thing: I always had a plan. But this wasn't just any plan. This was a masterpiece of strategic execution that would make my marketing director proud if she knew I was applying campaign management principles to relationship dissolution. Step 1. Information gathering. Complete. Step 2. Resource allocation and timeline development. In progress. I pulled up my laptop and opened what I mentally dubbed Operation Fresh Start. Though unlike Jake's group chat, this one existed only in my head and a carefully encrypted folder on my personal drive. The beauty of being detail-oriented is that untangling 3 years of shared life becomes a project with clear deliverables and measurable outcomes. I started with the financials. Our shared expenses were minimal. We'd kept separate bank accounts because Jake believed financial independence maintains relationship health. At the time I'd thought it was mature. Now I realized it was convenient for exactly this type of situation. Utilities were in my name. The lease was in my name. Even the Wi-Fi password was something I'd chosen. Jake had moved into my life more than we'd built something together, and apparently I'd been too in love to notice the difference. Next, the Seattle opportunity. I called Amanda Richardson, my former colleague who'd taken the West Coast position 6 months ago. Emma, please tell me you're calling about that remote director role. Amanda's voice was bright with hope. They still haven't filled it, and honestly they need someone with your strategic background. What's the timeline if I were interested? I asked, surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded. They'd want you to start within 3 weeks. There's a major client presentation in a month, and they need someone who can hit the ground running. The salary is 30% more than what you're making now, plus relocation assistance. 30% more. Enough to rent a beautiful apartment with a view of Elliott Bay, maybe even save for that photography course I'd always wanted to take. Jake used to say my interest in photography was a nice hobby but not practical for building wealth. I'll send over my updated portfolio today, I said. And Amanda, thanks for thinking of me. Are you kidding? You're exactly what they need. Plus, Seattle is amazing. The coffee alone will change your life. After hanging up, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Excitement about my future. Not our future, not the carefully planned timeline Jake and I had discussed for marriage and mortgage applications, but my future. Emma's future. The woman who was finally ready to stop apologizing for taking up space. My phone buzzed with a text from Jake. Miss you already, Red Heart. Tonight's going to be long, but thinking about coming home to you makes it bearable. The audacity was breathtaking. While he was probably picking up decorations for Sarah's party, he was sending me romantic messages like breadcrumbs to keep me satisfied. I screenshot the message, not for evidence but for the reminder I'd need later when I questioned whether I was making the right decision. I replied, "Take your time. I'm planning something special too." Technically true. Planning my exit was definitely special. The apartment suddenly felt different, like I was seeing it through the eyes of someone who was already halfway gone. The couch where we'd binge-watched entire seasons of shows Jake chose. The kitchen table where I'd eaten dinner alone more nights than I'd eaten with him. The bedroom where I'd pretended not to notice when he turned away from me, claiming he was too tired, while staying up another hour on his phone. I started making lists, another marketing habit that served me well in crisis management. What to pack immediately, what to ship later, what to leave behind. Some decisions were easy. My clothes, my books, my grandmother's jewelry. Others required more thought. The coffee maker we'd bought together, the artwork we'd chosen for the living room walls, the collection of wine we'd been saving for special occasions, that apparently never came. But the hardest list was the one I didn't write down. All the dreams I'd attached to this relationship that I'd need to release. The wedding we'd never planned but I'd imagined. The house we talked about buying next year. The children whose names we'd jokingly debated. The future I'd thought we were building together while Jake was apparently maintaining emotional real estate for someone else. My laptop chimed with an email notification. Amanda had already forwarded my information to the Seattle team, and they wanted to schedule a video interview for tomorrow afternoon. While Jake was nursing his hangover from Sarah's party, I'd be interviewing for the job that would change everything. The irony wasn't lost on me. Tonight, while Jake was busy recreating his college glory days, I was busy creating my actual future. While he was choosing nostalgia, I was choosing growth. While he was planning the perfect evening for his ex-girlfriend, I was planning the perfect exit from a relationship that had expired without either of us noticing. I looked at the clock. Jake would be leaving the office soon to set up for the party, probably texting me updates about his brutal deadline, while arranging flowers and testing sound systems. The performance was impressive in its commitment to fiction. But here's what Jake didn't understand about strategic planning. The best campaigns succeed not because they're the loudest or most dramatic, but because they're the most authentic. And my campaign for personal liberation was about to be devastatingly authentic. Phase 1 was complete. Intelligence gathering and resource allocation. Phase 2 would begin tonight while Jake was busy proving that some people never outgrow their need for external validation. I was about to show him what internal validation looked like. At 6:47 p.m., Jake texted me a photo of his empty office with the caption, "Still here, probably another few hours. Order yourself something nice for dinner, red heart." The timestamp was perfect. According to Sarah's Instagram story from 20 minutes earlier, the party setup was already in full swing at the rooftop bar. I could see balloon arrangements and string lights in the background of her, getting ready for tonight. So grateful for Friends Who Care Sparkle's post. Jake wasn't at his office. He was probably hanging those very lights while composing lies to send to me. I stared at my reflection in our bedroom mirror, but instead of the defeated woman I expected to see, I found someone who looked powerful. Maybe it was the way I'd styled my hair, sleek and professional rather than the soft waves Jake preferred. Maybe it was the black dress I'd chosen, the one he'd once said was too sophisticated for most occasions. Or maybe it was simply the knowledge that I was finally done pretending this was enough. My phone rang. "Maya, please tell me you're not sitting at home feeling sorry for yourself," she said without preamble. "Actually, I'm getting ready to go out." "Out? Emma, if you're planning some dramatic confrontation." "Not a confrontation," I said, applying lipstick with steady hands. "An observation." "That sounds ominous." "I'm going to the party, Maya." Silence. "Then, are you insane?" "Probably. But I need to see it. I need to see him with them, see how he acts when he thinks I'm safely tucked away at home believing his lies. I need to witness who he really is when he thinks no one who matters is watching." "Emma, that's going to hurt." "It's going to set me free," I corrected. "Because right now, part of me still wants to believe this is all some misunderstanding. That maybe the group chat doesn't mean what I think it means. That maybe I'm overreacting." "You're not overreacting. I know that in my head. But I need to know it in my heart too. I need to see him choose her, Maya. I need to watch him be the man he really is so I can stop loving the man I thought he was." Maya was quiet for a moment. "Hey. But I'm coming with you." "No, you're not. This is something I have to do alone. Besides, someone needs to be available to help me move boxes this weekend." "Move boxes?" I told her about Seattle, about the interview tomorrow, about the life I was building while Jake built his elaborate fantasy evening. By the time I finished, Maya was crying. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered. "And so sorry it took this for you to see how amazing you are." "Don't be sorry. Some lessons can only be learned the hard way." After we hung up, I sat on our bed, the bed where Jake had held me last night while planning another woman's party, and made one final decision. I wasn't going to the party to fight for him. I wasn't going to make a scene or demand explanations. I was going to watch the man I'd loved for 3 years choose someone else, and then I was going to choose myself. The Uber ride to the rooftop bar felt like traveling to a different dimension. The city looked the same, but I felt like I was seeing it through new eyes. These streets where Jake and I had walked hand in hand suddenly seemed full of possibilities rather than memories. That restaurant where we'd had our first anniversary dinner looked smaller, less significant. The bookstore where he'd bought me poetry collections I'd treasured seemed quaint rather than romantic. "You going somewhere special tonight?" the driver asked, glancing at me in the rearview mirror. "You could say that," I replied. "I'm going to see something I need to see." "Sounds mysterious." "It's more like clarity," I said, surprised by my own honesty with a stranger. "Sometimes you have to witness something ending before you can really begin something new." He nodded like he understood. "My ex-wife used to say that closure isn't about getting answers. It's about accepting that you already have all the information you need." As we pulled up to the building, I could see the warm glow of lights from the rooftop. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, silhouettes moved against the backdrop of the city skyline. Somewhere up there, Jake was probably laughing at Sarah's stories about London, asking about her future plans, being attentive in ways he hadn't been with me in months. But instead of jealousy, I felt something unexpected. Gratitude. Gratitude that Sarah had come back and forced this moment of truth. Gratitude that Jake had shown me who he really was before I'd wasted more years trying to be who he wanted. Gratitude that I'd grown strong enough to recognize the difference between fighting for love and fighting for scraps. I paid the driver and stepped onto the sidewalk, looking up at the building where my relationship was about to officially end. Not with screaming or ultimatums or desperate pleas for him to choose me. It was going to end with me finally choosing me. And Jake was about to learn that some choices can't be undone. The elevator ride to the rooftop felt like ascending to my own liberation. The elevator doors opened to reveal a scene that was even more elaborate than I'd imagined. Jake hadn't just thrown a party for Sarah. He'd created a love letter to their shared past. Fairy lights draped between tall cocktail tables, casting everything in the kind of warm, romantic glow that made even casual conversations look intimate. A playlist of what were obviously their songs from college drifted through hidden speakers. The bar featured a custom cocktail menu with drinks named after inside jokes I'd never understand. And there, in the center of it all, was Jake. He wore the navy blazer I'd bought him for my company's holiday party, the one he'd claimed was too formal for most occasions. His hair was styled the way I'd always suggested, but he'd always dismissed as trying too hard. He looked happy in a way I hadn't seen in months, animated and engaged, holding court with their college friends like he was exactly where he belonged. Sarah stood beside him, radiant in a flowing emerald dress that caught the light every time she moved. She was beautiful, I had to admit that. But more than beautiful, she was comfortable. She belonged in Jake's orbit in a way that I'd spent 3 years trying to achieve and clearly never had. I ordered a drink from the bar. Whiskey neat, something I'd never ordered in front of Jake because he'd once said it was too aggressive for women, and positioned myself near the floor-to-ceiling windows where I could observe without being immediately noticed. The bartender, a woman about my age with purple streaks in her hair, gave me an appreciative nod. "Good choice," she said. "Nothing like quality whiskey to give you courage for whatever you're facing." "Is it that obvious?" "Honey, I've been tending bar for 8 years. I can spot a woman on a mission from across the room. The question is, are you here to fight for him or to fight for yourself?" I took a sip of the whiskey, feeling it burn away the last of my hesitation. Definitely the latter. Even better. Those fights usually have the most satisfying endings. From my vantage point, I could hear fragments of conversation. Jake regaling the group with stories about Sarah's adventures in London, asking detailed questions about her thesis, hanging on every word like she was revealing state secrets. Their friends responded to him with the kind of easy familiarity that comes from years of shared experiences. Experiences that had apparently never included girlfriends like me. Emma. I turned to find Marcus, one of Jake's college friends I'd met exactly twice in 3 years. He looked genuinely surprised to see me, then quickly uncomfortable, like he'd been caught in something he wasn't supposed to know about. "Hi Marcus," I said calmly. "Lovely party. Does Jake know you're here?" "Not yet. But I'm sure he'll figure it out soon enough." Marcus glanced around nervously. "Listen, Emma, this isn't what it looks like." "Marcus," I interrupted gently, "it's exactly what it looks like. And that's perfectly fine." Before he could respond, I heard Jake's laugh ring out across the rooftop. Not his polite social laugh or his nervous laugh when he was trying to deflect uncomfortable conversations. This was his genuine, unguarded laugh. The one I'd fallen in love with 3 years ago and hadn't heard directed at me in months. I followed the sound and found him standing with Sarah and another couple, gesturing animatedly as he told some story that was making everyone laugh. Sarah's hand rested on his arm, casual, familiar, like it belonged there. And Jake wasn't pulling away. If anything, he was leaning into the contact. So then, Jake was saying, "Sarah calls me at midnight, panicking because she can't figure out the tube system, and I'm trying to navigate London public transportation from my apartment in Chicago using Google Maps. And he actually figured it out." Sarah interjected, looking at him with undisguised affection. "Talked me through the entire route while I wandered around Westminster at midnight like a lost tourist." "That's what friends do," Jake said, but his smile held something warmer than friendship. I took another sip of whiskey and realized I was witnessing something I'd never seen before. Jake being authentically himself. Not the careful, measured version he was with me, always slightly guarded, always maintaining some invisible boundary. This was Jake unleashed, Jake in his natural habitat, surrounded by people who'd known him before he'd learned to package himself for adult relationships. And I finally understood why our relationship had always felt like work for him. I wasn't part of this world, the world where he was effortlessly charming and completely understood. I was the addition he'd made to his life, not the foundation it was built on. Emma. I turned to find Jake standing behind me, his face cycling rapidly through surprise, confusion, and something that might have been panic. The golden glow from the fairy lights made him look younger, more like the college boy he apparently still was in his heart. "Hi, Jake," I said, raising my glass slightly. "Wonderful party. You really outdid yourself." His mouth opened and closed like he was trying to find words that didn't exist. Behind him, I could see Sarah approaching, her expression curious rather than hostile. "What are you doing here?" Jake finally managed. I smiled, feeling lighter than I had in months. "Just getting some closure." "Closure?" Jake's voice cracked slightly on the word, and I watched him glance frantically between me and Sarah, who had materialized beside him like she was drawn by some invisible tether. "Emma." Sarah's voice was bright, warm, perfectly calibrated to sound delighted rather than threatened. "What a wonderful surprise. Jake didn't mention you were coming." The way she said it, with just enough emphasis on Jake's name, made it clear she knew exactly what kind of surprise this was. But Sarah was smart, probably smarter than Jake gave her credit for. She wasn't going to be the jealous ex-girlfriend making a scene. She was going to be gracious, welcoming, completely reasonable. "That's because he didn't know," I said simply, taking another sip of my whiskey. "I decided to surprise him." Jake looked like he might actually be sick. The color had drained from his face and he kept running his hand through his hair, a nervous tic I'd learned to recognize as his processing panic gesture. That's great," he stammered. "I mean, I'm glad you're here. I was just telling everyone about the time Sarah got lost in London and—" "Yes, I heard that story," I interrupted gently. "It sounded very intimate. All those midnight phone calls to help someone navigate a foreign city." Sarah's eyes sharpened slightly, but her smile never wavered. "Jake's always been such a good friend. Even when I was thousands of miles away, I knew I could count on him." "Even at midnight," I said. "Even when he had a girlfriend sleeping beside him who might not appreciate being woken up by his ex's travel emergencies." The words hung in the air like smoke. Around us, I could feel the party continuing, but our little triangle had created its own bubble of tension. Jake looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. "Emma," he said quietly, "can we talk privately?" "Actually, I think this is perfect," I said, gesturing to the rooftop around us. "All your friends are here, Sarah's here, everyone who matters to you. It seems like the right time for honesty." "What do you mean?" Sarah asked, though something in her expression suggested she already knew. I looked at Jake, really looked at him. This man I'd loved for 3 years, who'd shared my bed and my dreams and my daily routines, but had apparently never shared his heart. Not completely. Not the way he was sharing it now, surrounded by people who'd known him when he was young and unguarded and authentic. "I mean," I said, setting my empty glass on a nearby table, "that I finally understand what I've been missing all this time." "Emma, you're upset," Jake said, stepping closer. "You don't understand the context of tonight." "I understand perfectly," I said, and my voice was steady, calm, almost clinical. "You've been planning this for weeks. The decorations, the playlist, the custom cocktails, the careful coordination to make sure Sarah felt special and welcomed home. You've put more thought and effort into this one evening than you've put into our relationship in the past 6 months." Sarah shifted uncomfortably. "Emma, I think you're misunderstanding." "Am I?" I turned to her with genuine curiosity. "Help me understand then. When exactly did you and Jake start planning this reunion? Because the group chat messages go back 2 weeks, but I'm guessing the idea started forming the moment you posted about coming home." Jake's face went ashen. "You looked at my phone? Your phone was buzzing all morning with party planning updates. Kind of hard to miss. Sarah will love the surprise playlist when it's right there on the lock screen." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the ambient party noise seemed to fade as Jake realized the scope of what I knew. "Look," Sarah said finally, her voice losing some of its warmth. I didn't ask Jake to throw me a party. If you two are having relationship problems. We're not having relationship problems, I said with a smile that felt surprisingly genuine. We're having relationship clarity. For the first time in 3 years, everything makes perfect sense. I looked around the rooftop one more time, at the fairy lights Jake had hung with such care, at the college friends who'd never made room for me in their circle, at Sarah in her perfect dress receiving the kind of attention I'd spent 3 years hoping Jake would give me. This is beautiful, I said, and I meant it. Really, Jake? You created something magical here. The kind of evening that creates lasting memories. He stared at me like I'd started speaking a foreign language. Emma, I can explain. There's nothing to explain, I said, already pulling out my phone to call an Uber. You did exactly what you wanted to do. You created the perfect evening for the person who matters most to you. The only mistake was thinking you could do it while keeping me as a backup plan. That's not what this is, Jake said desperately. Emma, please. Actually, I said, watching my ride request get accepted, it's exactly what this is. And you know what? I'm grateful. Sarah looked genuinely confused now. Grateful? Grateful that you came back and forced this moment, I said to her. Grateful that Jake showed me who he really is when he thinks no one important is watching. Grateful that I finally learned the difference between being someone's girlfriend and being someone's choice. My phone buzzed. The Uber was 2 minutes away. I hope you two figure out what this is, I said, gesturing between them. But I'm done being the placeholder while you decide. 6 months later, I was standing in my corner office on the 32nd floor of a Seattle high-rise, watching the morning sun turn Elliott Bay into liquid gold. My coffee, a perfect courte-du from the shop downstairs that knew my order by heart, steamed on my desk next to a stack of client presentations that actually excited me. The woman reflected in the floor-to-ceiling windows looked confident, successful, genuinely happy. She looked like someone who had never spent 3 years trying to convince a man to love her properly. My assistant knocked and peeked in. Emma? The Morrison Industries team is here for the strategy session. Perfect. Give me 2 minutes. The Morrison account, the same presentation I'd been preparing when I discovered Jake's party planning, had followed me to Seattle when they decided to switch agencies. Apparently, my reputation for strategic insight and uncompromising standards had preceded me. Funny how those same qualities Jake had found too intense were exactly what made me successful in my career. My phone buzzed with a text from Maya. Dinner tonight? I have news eyes. I smiled, typing back. Can't wait. The usual place. Maya had visited twice since I'd moved, each time marveling at the life I'd built. You're like a completely different person, she'd said during her last visit. You're lighter. Like you're finally taking up the right amount of space. He was right. Everything about my life felt intentional now, from the apartment I'd chosen in Capitol Hill with its exposed brick and view of the Space Needle, to the photography classes I'd enrolled in, to the way I'd learned to say no to things that didn't serve me. I'd even started dating again, though nothing serious. After Jake, I'd needed time to remember what it felt like to be chosen enthusiastically, not reluctantly. The strategy session went perfectly. Morrison Industries was launching a new sustainable technology line, and my team's campaign concept had them literally applauding. As the clients filed out, my phone rang with an unknown Chicago number. For a split second, my heart skipped, a remnant of the woman I used to be. But when I answered, it wasn't Jake's voice. Emma? This is Dr. Patricia Chen. My former therapist. The woman who'd helped me understand the difference between fighting for love and fighting for scraps. Dr. Chen, this is unexpected. Is everything okay? I hope you don't mind me calling. I have something unusual to share and I wanted to check if you'd be comfortable with it. She explained that she'd been contacted by someone from my past. Someone seeking therapy who'd specifically mentioned our sessions as inspiration for getting help. Apparently, this person had witnessed how I'd handled a difficult situation and wanted to learn similar emotional regulation skills. I can't share details due to confidentiality, Dr. Chen continued, but I wanted to ask if you'd be willing to speak with someone about your experience with personal growth and boundary setting. It would be completely anonymous and you could decline any questions you're uncomfortable with. Is this person struggling with a similar situation to what I went through? Without breaking confidentiality, let's say they're learning that actions have consequences, and they're trying to understand how to become the kind of person who makes better choices. I found myself curious despite everything. What kind of conversation are we talking about? A phone call, maybe 30 minutes. They're particularly interested in how you developed the strength to walk away from something that wasn't serving you, and how you rebuilt your life afterward. The old Emma would have said no immediately. Too much risk of getting pulled back into drama. But the new Emma was secure enough in her growth to help someone else find their way. Hey, I said. I'll do it. Wonderful. I'll coordinate with them and send you the details. After hanging up, I couldn't shake the feeling that this mysterious person seeking therapy was someone I knew. The timing, the specific interest in my situation, the way Dr. Chen had phrased everything, it all felt familiar. That evening, Maya and I met at our favorite restaurant in Pike Place Market. She was practically vibrating with excitement. Okay, spill, I said as soon as we'd ordered wine. What's the news? I ran into Jake's friend Marcus last week, she said, watching my face carefully for any reaction. I felt nothing. No spike of anxiety, no flutter of curiosity about Jake. Just mild interest in what Maya was about to tell me. And I prompted, Emma, Jake's life completely fell apart after that night. Maya explained that within a week of Sarah's party, Jake's carefully constructed worlds had collided spectacularly. Sarah, it turned out, had never intended their reunion to be anything more than friendship. She'd actually been in a long-distance relationship with someone she'd met in London. When she'd realized Jake's feelings weren't entirely platonic, she'd been horrified. Apparently, she told him that planning such an elaborate party for an ex while lying to his girlfriend was emotionally manipulative and deeply troubling, Maya continued. She said it reminded her why they'd broken up in the first place. He never could handle emotional honesty. But that wasn't the worst part. Jake's college friends, witnessing my calm exit from the party, had started asking uncomfortable questions about how he'd treated me. Several of them had reached out to apologize for never including me, admitting they'd followed Jake's lead in keeping his real life separate from his college life. Marcus said Jake had a complete breakdown, Maya continued. Started therapy, quit his job, moved back in with his parents. Apparently, losing you made him realize he'd never actually grown up. I took a sip of wine, processing this information. I expected to feel satisfaction, vindication, maybe even a little smugness. Instead, I felt something unexpected. Pity. That's actually really sad, I said and meant it. Maya looked surprised. Sad? Emma, he put you through 3 years of emotional limbo. I know. But think about it, he's 29 years old and just now learning basic relationship skills. He wasted 3 years of my life, but he wasted 3 years of his own life too. The difference is I grew from it. My phone buzzed with an email from Dr. Chen with details for tomorrow's call. As I read it, everything clicked into place. Jake was the person seeking therapy. Jake had witnessed my strength that night and wanted to understand how to become someone worthy of that kind of respect. For the first time since leaving Chicago, I thought about Jake with something other than indifference. I thought about him with hope that he might finally become the man he'd always had the potential to be. But more importantly, I realized that his growth, or lack thereof, was no longer my responsibility. I was finally completely free.